Donald Trump's presidency was launched with a lie. He and his spokesman, Sean Spicer, insisted that there had been record crowds at his inauguration. Fact-checkers produced photographic evidence to prove they were dwarfed by the Obama inauguration crowds in 2009.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
Trump refused to accept it.
I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake.
He lies as easily as he breathes. And the slightly worrying thing, or the more worrying thing, is that he clearly doesn't care. It doesn't matter to him when he's caught out. He has an extraordinary relationship with the truth.
It marked the outbreak of all-out hostilities between the Trump administration and the mainstream media.
Your organization's terrible. Let's go. Go ahead. Quiet, quiet. Don't be rude. I'm not going to give you a question. You are fake news.
The first time ever we have a president who's running via tweets, and those tweets are 80% made up.
His cabinet have very much said that the news media and news organisations are the enemy. They're trying to create a situation where they have much more control over information and taking that control away from news organisations which have high editorial standards and journalistic ethics.
I don't think it's okay for the President of the United States to lie, and you should always be able to condemn lies, and that's the point of having free speech. Means you come out and say, this is absolutely untrue, this is immoral that you've done this is bad, and we can, the people of America can make a political decision on whether they think the president is fit for the job. They have already.
First time we've seen attempted interference in elections in the United States of America, isn't it, Admiral?
As the investigation gets underway into Russian meddling in the US election, there are fears that this year's elections in Europe could also be under threat.
Russia wants first and foremost to encourage the election of politicians who are favourable to Russia, more favourable to Russia than their opponents. So they supported Trump. They are clearly supporting Marine Le Pen in France.
What we seem to have seen is Russia generally attempting to undermine the sort of coherence and the strength of the West. So, undermining democracy or the democratic message, challenging organisations like the EU and NATO.
Russia is also not above fake news, completely fake news, planting fake news.
In January 2016, it was claimed that a Russian teenager had been raped in Germany by a Muslim migrant. It increased pressure on Angela Merkel's migrant policies.
The German police said in the end it was a completely groundless accusation. It really was fake news. There was nothing in it whatsoever. But the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, had, banged his drum about it and said, this must be dealt with.
Countries close to Russia have long had to counter Russian propaganda. The Finnish government pours money into educating its citizens.
There is enough circumstantial evidence and there are clear cases where pro-Russian accounts in the social media spread information, part of which is false and fake and invented.
Russia is basically desperate to stop them joining NATO or even getting close to NATO. And that's the reason for these sort of Russian strategies of fake news, of forging documents, broadcasting biased news stories via state outlets.
European governments are now reinforcing their efforts to counter potential interference in upcoming elections. The EU has increased funding to its East Stratcom task force, which challenges and rebuts fake news.
In Germany, the fact that they've seen the US campaign and how that went, and the fact that Merkel, as I say, and her people have been much more forward-leaning about saying, we think we've got a problem, and have reported Russian efforts to get inside the email servers of the Bundestag and the like. I don't think you'll see the extremes that perhaps we saw in the US.
2016 is now being seen as a wake-up call in recognizing the impact of the internet and social media on democracy. But what solutions are being offered?
Right now is a very interesting time to be alive, I think, because this, right now is when we're really having to get to grips with this and decide what kind of a world we want to have in the future. We just need to decide as a society, how we're going to define truth and news and reality, and what is going to be the price of knowingly publishing stuff cynically that isn't true.
There are those who fear the panic over fake news will open the door to censorship of the internet.
It really is an elitist view, and it's a desire to control what people can think and say, and for anyone who really believes even slightly in freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that's absolutely terrifying.
This is still such a new area that everyone is thinking through how to approach it. And this is an ongoing process involving news organisations and technology companies and the social networks themselves, all having conversations to try and approach this in a way which will stop the flow of misinformation without having an impact on freedom of speech.
The idea that fake news on Facebook, of which it's a very small amount of the content, influenced the election in any way, I think is a pretty crazy idea.
Mark Zuckerberg was very resistant to the idea that Facebook and social media had anything to do with the dissemination of fake news or the result of the US election in November. He's since backpedaled from that, I think, because he's had so many people, including a lot of his staff, saying, no, clearly this has had an impact. I don't think that he or Eric Schmidt of Google want to go down in history as the people who were behind, the destruction of democracy in the West.
Facebook has now introduced a tool to alert users before they share something that has been flagged as fake. Google is starting to label some search results to highlight material that's been vetted as true or false by fact-checking partners. But there is disagreement about how much the internet giants should be doing.
There's no doubt that in this new kind of digital communication environment, that the people who control the infrastructure, the people who control the social networks or even search engines are really important in shaping the way that we communicate. And it's not just a neutral space. They do have a responsibility to pay attention to that and be responsible about that. But I don't really want Mark Zuckerberg to decide what kind of information I get. There are too many politicians, there are too many corporations who have an interest in trying to close down the internet.
The old media, newspapers, TV, has a legal responsibility, not to be spreading things they know are not true. And if someone is libeled, they can sue and so on. And I think, the fix actually is really simple. The Facebook, Google, they are now media organizations, and I think they need to be treated as media organizations and therefore take responsibility. The thing is, if that responsibility is placed on them, you watch how quickly they find ways of doing it. They'll do it. They have a lot of money with which to solve this problem.
The solution to fake news is to, on the one hand, argue for more speech, not less, to really fight back against this desire to censor it, to stop it, to argue for absolute freedom of speech, for the freedom to lie, for the freedom to combat those lies with the truth.
The very success of online news has put traditional journalism under financial pressure as never before.
One of the problems is that good journalism is really expensive, and the traditional newspapers in particular have been undermined by the advertising model of most of the advertising going online.
But there are suggestions of a backlash.
We added 276,000 new digital subscribers in the last quarter of 2016. And that's more than we added in the whole of 2013 and the whole of 2014 put together.
The New York Times, in the wake of the Trump victory, has had a record surge in subscriptions. Really remarkable, a kind of a Trump bump, which strongly suggests that people will come to trusted media when the chips are really down.
Fact-checking organizations are being set up all over the world to combat fake news.
The trouble is making the truth as shareable and interesting and emotive as the misinformation, as the lie. Fake news and misinformation is often designed to kind of create a very strong emotional response. It's like clickbait. And making the truth as shareable and as interesting is the real challenge, I think, for journalism.
But I think the mainstream media, basically, we kind of have to show our workings. We have to stop opining, and we have to show. And we have to say, this is what we have found. Here's the proof, here's the evidence, this, and you add this to this, and you get this.
There are also calls for better digital education.
I think it's pretty simple. Educate, 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 particularly the older generations, because the millennials already know how, they're very sophisticated and knowing how to navigate this stuff.
I think before you share is probably the main, should be a slogan in terms of digital literacy.
Some commentators believe that fears about the influence of fake news is overstated. But there is a consensus of caution over any rush to censor the freedom of the internet.
You've got this kind of panic about the influence of fake news, when there's been a complete drop in the idea that every individual does come to politics and to news with their own opinions, with their own sort of reservations, and with their intellect.
We don't live in a post-truth society. I think we know, most of us, what we mean by truth. A lot of things which we've been taking for granted were shaken up last year, and I think there's been a real rallying round, and in a way it was probably good that this came now and not in 10 years' time, when we might have artificial intelligence and algorithms that are way more powerful running amok.
What we mustn't do is to have some kind of big brother voice from on high determining what is and what isn't right. Users need to show up, and need to stand up and need to denounce fakery for what it is.